Welcome to SoCal Cyclist Podcast, episode number 42, the podcast that brings you the people and practice of the Peloton. I'm your host, Brian Coe, and I need to tell you, episode 42 means we're only 10 episodes away from episode 52. What does that mean? When I started this podcast, I basically said, I'm going to do 52 guests in 52 weeks in 1 year. It's an ambitious goal for podcasting because every week I have to have a unique and somewhat special guest, I'd say, do the podcast. And it's been hard because I've been going at it, and now there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I am going to stop the podcast when we hit the season or series finale. When we get to episode 52, take a very short amount of time to regroup and really build on season 2 to make it 10 times better than season 2 was. So we're definitely at the light at the end of the tunnel, and just 10 episodes left in season 1. It's great. With me co-hosting today is Adam Saba. How are you doing today, Adam?
Great, except for this weather.
Yeah, no, this weather's pretty bad, even for SoCal standards. I would say most people are spending time on the trainer. You ever ride your bike indoors on the trainer?
Yes, I don't know what you guys use these days, but I had the kind that was your bike wasn't attached. It was just like on 2 wheels. Like you could fall off.
Rollers.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's
people still use them. I
put holes in a couple walls from those rollers.
So that you're pretty skilled, because some cyclists out there don't even ride rollers, and for you being not really a cyclist, to ride rollers is pretty impressive. So keep at it, and it actually helps improve your skills.
Do people use those anymore?
Oh yeah, when people go to races and stuff and they warm up on their trainers, a lot of guys are on rollers and they're balancing on their bike. It's cool because too, when they're done and they dismount, if you're like super cool, you can kind of bunny hop off directly.
Oh, no, never did that. I only did that by accident, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's fun. So let's go ahead and get into some listener mail.
All right. So this is from Duff, and here's his question. Hi, while I don't live in SoCal, I found your podcast and really enjoy them. While I know cross country and roads seem to be more the norm, there are some mountain bike SoCal riders I'd like to suggest. Johnny O'Mara. Oh, he's a motocross. He's
really?
He's a famous motocross.
Johnny O'Mara. I
didn't recognize that name.
Yeah.
Has a great story and an inspiration to all of us masters racer. Also, Brian Lopes would be great too. I know you had Slasher on for the promotion of his races and his background, and that was a really great podcast. Perhaps others would like to hear from Osho and Lopes also. Thanks for the consideration, and keep the great work up. Oh, I'd love to hear Johnny O'Mara.
Thank you, Duff Yoakum. That's awesome. I don't know O'Mara. So O'Mara is a former motocross racer?
He raced in the 80s and all the way up to, he retired in 1990, raced for Honda, Kawasaki, was a phenomenal rider. He's called the Osho, really flashy style. He's in the Hall of Fame, Motocross Hall of Fame, yeah.
Okay. Well, I would love to have him on, but for me personally, Brian Lopes is kind of a legend from the 90s doing downhill dual slalom. He was somebody that could do it all, and he was built like a weightlifter. I mean, he's so strong. And it was often said that he could take on anyone, even the strongest track guys at the time. I believe he's an Orange County guy. So, Brian, if you're listening, I would love to have you on the podcast. And if you're not listening and you can get a hold of him, definitely do on my behalf. And that reminds me, with only 10 episodes left, who do you want to have on there, listeners? Who do you want to hear from? This person, Duff, is a fan of mountain biking. So I love that mountain bikers are listening to my podcast, even though I'm more road centric. But yeah, I've tried to have track, cyclocross, road, and really represent cycling, everything except for BMX, not counting Greg Romero for episode number 1. He's a former BMX legend, actually, and then races on the road. So yeah, as long as it's got 2 wheels and rides, I'm all for it, and doesn't have a motor. No offense. Oh, okay. No offense, Adam, being the motocross.
You're the
guy
motor, right? The rider.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if you saw the 60 Minutes talking about bike motors, but that is kind of the next form of cheating that's brought out in the limelight. They brought in a bike of a under 23 female cyclocross rider where they found a motor in her bike. Oh. And the way they do it is they take these iPads that have thermal scanners and look for heat signatures inside the frames.
Oh, I thought from 60 Minutes they had done it by the weight.
They also do that too.
If it's a little bit heavier and they're still racing it, then that's a good telltale sign.
Yeah, because weight's everything. So even, I think they said the difference was 800 grams. That's huge in cycling. Even for me, an amateur, I could pick up my bike and notice an 800 gram difference. So that on the World Tour level, it definitely raises some eyebrows for sure. So yes, thank you, Duff, for writing that in. And if you would like to get a hold of me, you can reach out at Brian at SoCalCyclist.org or Brian, SoCal_cyclist on Instagram, Twitter. Facebook is SoCal Cyclist Podcast, and then the website is SoCalCyclist.org. If you haven't already, you only have 10 episodes to do this, so please leave a subscribe or review and subscribe on iTunes to keep the show alive. I guarantee you that the next season is going to be even better than this one, and this one has already surpassed my expectations in terms of content. So 52 guests, it's gone by in a flash. So let's go ahead and launch a new segment called Curious Neighbor. And Adam, you are my neighbor and have been for years, both here and other parts of North County. But cyclists out there, when you all ride together, that's great, but you don't live with these other cyclists unless you have them as roommates or something like that. But when the ride's over and you're on your way home and you're riding by yourself and you get home, I'm sure everybody has a neighbor who may not know about cycling, but are so used to seeing you leave your house, come back in your kit. And maybe every now and then they ask you questions like, oh, how far did you go? And how fast were you going? And it's just that kind of curious neighbor. What we've done at SoCal Cyclist Podcast is brought the curious neighbor in the form of Adam onto the podcast. So he can sort of ask some of the more mainstream questions that not a lot of people understand or know about. So Adam, what do you have for us today?
All right. So here's what I have noticed over the years. And like I said, I used to race triathlons, but I never got into it. I never rode in packs of riders. I was just always by myself.
Okay.
I think it's more traditional for triathletes to do that anyway.
They're not very good pack riders. No offense, triathletes.
But I would see this a lot, and just driving around, you'd see like riders in their gear with their shoes on hanging out at Starbucks drinking a coffee. Now, I guess they're drinking a coffee. They could be drinking a tea or something, but it always kind of seemed odd to me, not a criticism of, but it seemed odd to me that they would be not hanging out, but taking a break from riding or at the end of their ride at Starbucks with all their gear on. I kind of always avoided being around people when I had my gear on.
Is it just like the sight of people in tight clothing and shoes that go click, clack, click, clack?
Yeah.
And just there's 9 or 10 of them hanging out and everyone's just kind of looking at them like, oh man.
Well, for me, it's just, you're kind of, you're drawing attention to yourself with the shoes and the shorts and whatever, and you're kind of saying, hey, maybe you're thinking this, maybe you're not, but like, hey, I just got down on a long ride. I just worked out. I'm really tired. And it's like you're kind of doing this in front of a lot of people. When I did it, I just would like go home and no one ever saw me.
Right.
No one else saw me. So is that okay to do that? Am I being too much of a critic? I'm not really criticizing. Just something I never did.
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, coffee places are usually meetup places for people to gather and then leave for a ride.
Oh, okay.
So it's a mutual spot for people to say, hey, we're going to meet up here at this time, 8 a.m. at Wednesday at Starbucks, and that's where the ride leaves from. So everyone's just kind of hanging out until someone in the group says, okay, let's roll. And then they all leave together because that involves the pack riding part and these race rides.
So they may have not even ridden yet. They're just meeting there.
And depending on the time of day. Usually in the mornings when coffee shops are busy, guys are getting ready, and caffeine is probably the most popular stimulant among cyclists. And they drink coffee, espressos, especially on the pro level. They go there and they meet up and they leave. Now, I know where it can get kind of weird because if you're by yourself and then all of a sudden 20 guys roll up and now the line just got 3 times as long and they're all hanging out talking about things that you don't really care to listen to. I can see how that gets annoying, but then there are those people that pretty much ride to the coffee shop, and then that's their ride. They sit there for about 45 minutes to an hour and then ride back home.
So there are kind of some posers.
Yeah, of course, just like in any sport. Yeah, but there's people that, clean their bike, put them nice on display so everyone can look at it. I wouldn't say it's much different than those guys, that roll up on their motorcycle, throw their leather jacket over on it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And just kind of stand around. Right. I'm sure people with nice cars do that. But with cycling, yes, you have that segment. Now, for me personally, I still look at riding like training. So especially on the weekday when time's limited and daylight's scarce, I train. I have a set thing. The last thing I want to do is hang out at a coffee shop. I want to go home and take a shower. Yeah. And I've seen, I think the hashtag is lounge in Lycra, but there's this thing where people, I've seen people in grocery stores in their kit. The kit is the term for the jersey short shoes. I've seen people at kind of nice sit-down restaurants in their kit. It's weird. I mean, part of me says, okay, just go home and change and then come back and then go throughout your day. Other people, it's very much a part of their cycling because it's their chance too that they get away from the house and they get to socialize with friends. So they're seeing people. And then also after the ride too, it's a time and place for when they talk about their ride. I know it sounds weird, but remember when we used to surf?
Yeah, no. We used to go eat afterwards, but...
We'd hang out, we'd get a burrito, and then we just talk about our surf session.
But I've done that with a few riders before, when we've been riding, but it's never at coffee. It's like, let's go get a beer or something. That's what I mean. I could see them going
Well, cyclists go get beers too.
No, I can understand. I totally get that one. But at the coffee shop, I never drank coffee or anything to recover from a ride or during so maybe... maybe they might not be drinking coffee, so that might.
Well, a lot of them do, but let me ask you this: is it more of just like here's this group of people, the Cobra Kai, just rolling up, it's kind of being a little bit arrogant and loud?
No. I've never seen them arrogant. It's mostly just me driving by, and I've never seen a big group. It's mostly been just maybe a couple guys after a ride, and then they're hanging out. But in my mind, I'm like, just go to a bar and get a beer, or go home and drink a beer, or whatever, and drink or hang out.
You'll see that it's pretty common on weekends. Coffee shops, especially on the coast, are filled with cyclists, and cyclists have their general meetup places. I've met up with riders to leave on rides, and then maybe after a ride, it's like, okay, let's get a coffee and hang out. But for because I'm so time crunched with training and the podcast and family and stuff, I pretty much just train, and the next thing I want to do is go home, shower. And then maybe if people are like, oh, let's get a beer, I'll show up in my proper attire. I'm not going to, there's this term called clammy chamois. Like you don't want to hang out in your chamois all day. It's just gross. Just as soon as you're done, just get out of it, change, and start recovering. But yeah, I can see how that perception might leave some people going, oh, these cyclists, they all hang out there, this mob mentality.
It was never with the mob, but I thought a beer after a ride to taste good, but hanging out at a coffee shop and drinking coffee, I just can't.
Yeah,
but you're right. If it's a meeting spot, I get that part.
Yeah, and some people do stop for a beer, even mid-ride beer. Yeah, I've seen friends who put it in their water bottles a long time ago. I don't do that now, but it's a good question. And so all you friends of cyclists out there, yes, the people at the coffee shops meet up for various reasons, but it's just one of those things how I can see outside looking in, like, oh, it's this whole cult thing, but it's not. Cool. So Adam, we've got a great guest, and the guest today is actually a former professional cyclist and now a sports psychologist. Her name is Dr. Kristin Keim, and she is somebody who has spent a really important part helping top-level athletes cope and maintain and reach their goals. Now, do you think that there is a need for sports psychologists in sports?
Absolutely. I mean, I've never had one. I've never been good enough to need one or anything, but I mean, I think just like in general life, there's a need for that, and especially in professional sports, you'd need something like that. I think the mental side is so important that people don't realize. I mean, you could take a rider who's on the same equipment. On one day he does poorly and something snap in him, and the next time he's winning. I mean, I've seen that happen a lot.
Yeah. And you know, cycling is such a mentally tough sport because you're just suffering all the time, that you need somebody who's going to be an anchor for you. And she does that. And with her athletes, she's literally there. She was in Rio at the Olympics. She's been at many top level events, and she supports them, and is kind of an ear for them. And she brought up some really good points that I'd never considered, such as like, well, what happens after you do go to the Olympics or win your event? You know, there's a little bit of a depression, almost a bit of a, okay, what do I do next? And that's hard. Yeah, that's hard for cyclists, especially if, you know, unless you're like a well-known person where you're famous kind of year round. You know, this was your chance in the limelight, and then, okay, what's the next chapter? How do I retire?
Yeah.
You know, and you're still in your 20s for a lot of them. Yeah. It's kind of weird. So I learned a lot from Dr. Kristin Keim. She's just super down to earth. And, you know, I mentioned in the podcast, in a world filled with self-described for-profit life coaches and people that just only watch Dr. Phil and call themselves experts. She's a breath of fresh air because she's the real deal. She's an actual psychologist that can understand
and an athlete who suffered.
And an athlete and can understand things on a deep cognitive level. So let's go ahead and get into episode 42 with Kristin Keim.